Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and this is your Alaska weather this evening. Tonight is July 22nd, 2015, and it just so happens that it is also my anniversary of 8 years, and thus the tie tonight represents my wife and her awesome family. Happy anniversary, honey. I love you. And as always, you can stay up to date on our website, arh.noaa.gov. You can follow us on the weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Weather.gov/Alaska will take you to the regional perspective for all 3 Alaskan offices. NWS Alaska on Facebook will give you our social media posts there from, again, all 3 offices. And on Twitter, you can use the tag @NWS Alaska, hashtag AKwx for a regional perspective. And then you can find this show and a few other segments on YouTube using the call sign AKwx TV, Alaska Weather TV. So let's jump into the forecast for this Wednesday evening. Talking about our fire danger to start things off, and as you can see here, we have expanded the areas of fire danger that are out over the interior portions of the state, and also increased some of the fire danger for south central and southeastern portions of Alaska near the Copper River Basin. So what that is telling us is that basically we've continued to dry things out. Even though it has been rainy throughout much of Anchorage and parts of southwest Alaska, we have started to dry things out for the Copper River Basin and north of the Alaska Range. We do have one small pocket to bring your attention to of some more extreme fire danger here just outside of the Matanuska Valley, but otherwise our biggest area of concern right now is the Copper River Basin, where we do have some winds continuing to dry things out, and they have not really seen much rainfall there for the past several weeks now. So again, fires have been burning, the firefighters have done what they need to do, but fire danger is starting to creep back up here as we've been dry now for some spots for several days. So taking a look at the satellite imagery, you can see here fairly quiet conditions out over the Bering Sea. We have this area of low pressure continuing to spin, and this moisture feed up from southwest from the North Pacific, southwest to northeast. And we'll take a look at that one more time there, coming right through Dutch Harbor. And this area of low pressure is going to continue to fizzle out over the Bering Sea. So closer to home now, what we see is basically that area of low pressure is out over the Bering, and we do have just some moisture streaming up from the southwest. Our area of low pressure that we're concerned about for south central Alaska is right here in the Gulf of Alaska, and that is starting to develop and start to turn towards the southeast. And as it does so, it will bring some offshore flow later on in the week. But for now, it is bringing rain and some showers and ultimately some thunderstorms up along the Alaska Range. Towards southeast Alaska, conditions have been fairly nice today. For a July day, it's been fairly warm, mostly sunny skies for most locations there, and just some marine clouds down towards Ketchikan. And as we look at the loop one more time, we'll see how that low pressure out over the Bering is starting to weaken and pull away. And then we have another broad area of low pressure here just into Bristol Bay, and then this low pressure here south of Prince William Sound. There is a fairly robust system down south of the Aleutians, but we don't expect that to make a whole lot of northward advancement, maybe bringing some light rain to the central Aleutians due to high pressure being in front of that. Out over the central portion and northern portions of the state, we did have clear skies for much of the day, allowing temperatures to warm up quite a bit over the Brooks Range. And some patchy fog continues to hover right along the Arctic coast there. A little bit harder to see that on satellite because those are low clouds. They're off the surface now, and they will come back down to the surface tonight. So we do expect about a quarter-mile visibility for areas along the Arctic coast. So taking a look at today's weather map, there's that area of low pressure that is driving most of the weather for the state at this time. It's down to 1,000 millibars and still developing just northwest of Kodiak Island. Excuse me, and as it does so, it's continuing to spin off to the east, but will eventually make that turn to the southeast. And with that, the rain showers that we see throughout much of south central will start to pull away from Prince William Sound and down and towards the Gulf of Alaska and ultimately end up in southeast Alaska. our area of lower pressure and thermal troughing, as we call it, due to our warm, long, sunny afternoons, is helping to trigger thunderstorms once again from eastern, the Alcan border all the way through eastern Alaska and then back towards western Alaska, where we have some showers there. A little bit of patchy fog along the coast here. The fog has been a little bit more dense up towards the Arctic coast. Again, that's lifted off the surface for now, but should settle back down again tonight. As we look off towards the western portion of the Bering Sea, we do have a weak system that continues to fall apart out there, and with that, just some areas of fog near the western Aleutians. Shimmy reporting about a quarter mile this afternoon. So then taking a look into tonight's forecast, you can see our area of low pressure now down to 997 millibars, and this will continue to slide off to the south and east as we go into Thursday. And with that, the rain showers should also start to push from the west to the east, mainly starting to impact areas from Juneau northward, not quite to the Dixon entrance tonight, but nothing exceptionally heavy with this system, but just a fairly moderate system for the middle of July as we see some light rain move through the area. Thunderstorms will die off overnight, as we've expected the last couple nights when we lose that daytime heating. They just turn to showers mainly along the mountains. Some of those could drift down to the valleys and be a heavier shower into the evening hours, but those should dissipate through the overnight. Up along the Bering Sea and along the Bering Strait, we do have some patchy fog that becomes a little bit more widespread and a little bit more dense as we get up towards the Arctic coast, courtesy of this area of high pressure up here at 1,026 millibars. Taking a look now into Thursday's forecast, you can see that area of low pressure that we looked at on satellite loop, we see it now down to 1,010 millibars. And again, not expecting a whole lot of northward advancement due to some high pressure just out in front of it here, but it should help to bring some patchy fog and rain along with some warm air to the central Aleutians. Weak systems continue for the Bering, so for mariners traveling out that way, you can expect light winds and for the most part just light rain and some patchy fog, but otherwise fairly good conditions out over the Bering, all things considered. And then as we get towards the Gulf of Alaska, here's our area of low pressure, now down to 997 millibars. It is swinging in some colder air, not much colder, but cooler air behind it, so it will help to keep showers triggered throughout much of South Central and into the interior portions of the state on Thursday. A little bit closer to the mountains along the Alaska range, possibly even along the Talkeetna Mountains. We could see some thunderstorms fire in those regions as well. So for aviation purposes, be advised that we could have some more thunderstorms up into the mountainous regions. And then again, as we work our way northward, we see that areas of fog should be burning off through the morning hours on Thursday and lifting again into a stratus layer, but we do expect that fog to redevelop into Thursday morning. And then for southeast Alaska, expect a wet day on Thursday as this light rain starts to move onshore here, courtesy of this low pressure system. Then on into Friday now, we see that area of low pressure finally pulling away from much of the Gulf of Alaska. As it does so, it starts to bring drier conditions in through south central under northwesterly flow. Weak systems will continue through Bristol Bay, not expecting anything significant there as far as rainfall, but just some light onshore flow, keeping things more or less stable and just light rain and patchy fog. As we look towards the interior, once again expecting showers to develop on Friday. Don't expect these to be thunderstorms at this time, but that forecast will be updated over the next couple days, so keep an eye on that. And then again, the areas of fog along the Arctic coast starting to move off to the west as this area of low pressure starts to push its way to the west. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more here when we get to the sea ice. And then towards southeast Alaska, we do see our area of low pressure starting to slide away and bringing with it that rainfall, helping to bring a little bit drier conditions, just some showers expected Friday for southeast Alaska. Taking a look at our temperatures now for southeast Alaska, you can see mainly upper 50s and low 60s. Hoonah was 62 degrees and Sitka came in this afternoon at 4 o'clock at 61. And then towards Yakutat, 61 degrees. A little bit closer to south central, 56 degrees at Cordova and 57 at Valdez. On into southwest Alaska now, we did have temperatures mainly in the mid-50s, a few isolated pockets of upper 50s, but for the most part, mid-50s ranging from southwest and then lower 50s as you got out into the Aleutian chain. 53 degrees there at St. Paul and 54 at Dutch Harbor. Taking a look at temperatures over the interior now, 76 degrees this afternoon at Fairbanks. We saw 71 degrees at Eagle. Up towards the Arctic coast, it was actually relatively warm for some locations up there. We had 69 degrees at Point Lay and 63 degrees at Fort Wainwright, 44 at Dead Horse, and 45 degrees at Barrow. Out over the Seward Peninsula, we saw 58 degrees at Nome and 66 degrees at Kotzebue. So looking at tonight's low temperatures now, Mainly similar conditions to last night. We'll have, again, mainly mid-50s, lower 50s for the Yakutat area, but mainly lower 50s to mid-50s for southeast Alaska. As we get into south central, again, the cooler air is where those drier conditions are out over the Copper River Basin, expecting upper 40s. Towards south central, we have mainly 50s, low 50s, and southwest Alaska, you can expect temperatures between the mid to upper 40s. For much of the interior, keeping low 50s to mid 50s for areas stretching north to the Brooks Range and the Seward Peninsula, and then up towards the Arctic coast, we expect mid to upper 30s. Out over the Aleutian Range and the Alaska Peninsula, anywhere between the mid 40s to low 50s for tonight. On into Thursday's highs now, expect upper 50s to low 60s for southeast Alaska. Looking for upper 60s to low 70s for south central. Southwest should be in the 60s. And for the interior, a fairly warm day up there, mid to upper 70s, unless you're north of the Brooks Range where you'll see 40s and 50s dominating the high temperatures. Out towards the Aleutian Range, we expect anywhere between the low to upper 50s for areas out on the chain. So getting into flying weather now, we do have those thunderstorms that we talked about a little bit ago, stretching across the Alcan border and into much of the Alaska Range. Probably not as far west as the Kuskokwim Mountains, but nonetheless, we should see some thunderstorms develop tomorrow afternoon along the interior portions of the state. MVFR conditions, along with that that strengthening area of low pressure from much of the northeastern Gulf. And then our areas of IFR conditions are where we have some of that weaker flow out over the Bering Sea and lower stratus, lower visibilities, and lower ceilings expected in much of the Bering Sea. Taking a look at our passes now, we do expect Anaktuvik Pass to be VFR. Adigan will also be VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill should have thunderstorms in the afternoon, but also will be improving conditions as far as ceilings coming from MVFR to VFR. And then Rainy will also be MVFR, improving to VFR with some thunderstorms expected later in the day. Windy, VFR with thunderstorms in the afternoon. Isabel should be VFR with thunderstorms in the afternoon. Mantasta, similar conditions, visual flight rules there with thunderstorms. Tanita should not have any thunderstorms and visual flight rules will be predominant. Portage will see the moisture pull away, so improving from marginal visual flight rules to visual flight rules. And Chilkoot and White will remain MVFR throughout the day. So on into our freezing levels now. Our coldest area is down here just south of the area south of Bristol Bay, and we expect about 6,000 foot freezing levels into tomorrow morning for that area. Otherwise, generally around 8,000 feet for much of the south central portion of the state, and then that remains constant all the way up through the northern portion until you get to northeast and up into northern Canada. On into tomorrow's icing now. You can see here we do expect about above 6,000 feet, we should have some light to isolated moderate associated with that frontal system as it slides off to the southeast. Above 7,000 feet, light to isolated moderate, just with some weaker onshore flow there. And then all the way up to 11,000 feet you have to climb before you hit any light to isolated moderate icing out over the Bering Sea. Taking a look at our jet stream now, fairly active over Russia and diving into the western Bering at about 65 knots in support of this low pressure. But then it starts to link up here and become a little bit more zonal. That means moving from west to east as you get into the Gulf of Alaska. So no real strong systems expected, nothing really developing rapidly at this time. 95 knots from west to east before it becomes all the way down to 50 knots over the continental United States. And then just a small jet finger supporting this area of low pressure that we alluded to there on the surface maps at about 95 knots. Taking a look at our 9,000 foot winds, we do have things moving fairly quickly from west to east right here north of the Aleutian chain, then diving down across the Alaska Peninsula at about 50 knots underneath this area of low pressure, and then quickly turning back from the southwest to the north over western Canada. Over the mainland, we expect fairly light flow out of the northwest to northeast at about 10 knots, and then up towards the Arctic coast, there's that easterly flow around the area of high pressure at about 20 knots at 9,000 feet. On into the 3,000 foot winds now. Again, over the mainland, expecting mainly northwest to northeasterly flow, a little bit stronger here along the Alaska Range. But once you get down into the Bering and into the Gulf of Alaska, that's where we see our strongest winds coming through these gaps here at about 45 knots at 3,000 feet. That's where we expect our strongest flow to be emerging as it funnels through those gaps. 40 knots from west to east over the southern portion of the Gulf, and then becoming at about 10 knots out of the southwest as you climb over into Canada. And that brings us to our turbulence, and that's where you can expect the area of light to isolated moderate for areas below 4,000 feet. Again, interacting with the terrain there is where our biggest swath of turbulence is. Below 6,000 feet, way off into the western Aleutians, just light to isolated moderate. And then with that frontal system down here that we saw on the satellite, below 6,000 feet, that one could be a little bit stronger, occasional, widespread, moderate, but don't expect that to move too much farther north. Stay with us. We'll be right back with your marine forecast.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again talking about the augmented reality sandbox is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this. A quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level, say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
that is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version.
Sweet.
Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney. And
this tool here has a Microsoft Kinect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Kinect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Kinect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox too is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect, Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, I mean, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. We had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that and to see how it reacts in time, and
Right.
It's a dynamic learning tool, and it
Dynamic,
responds.
That's exactly the word.
And you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching tool for
Where does it
topography
go?
can it have? You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course. And even just understanding weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts.
And welcome back for your marine forecast. Let's dive right in. As you can look at our sea surface temperatures as of this afternoon, looking at very warm temperatures, looking at our scale here, all the way up into the low 50s, even climbing towards 60 degrees here towards the Dixon entrance, and temperatures even up into the 40s and the 30s as you stretch all the way through the Bering Strait. And so the impact that that is having on our sea ice is that it continues to mainly stay well to the north of the Bering Strait up in the Chukchi Sea. We will see this area here. This is called the Hanna ice block, and this will continue to melt in place. Not really expecting a whole lot of change there other than it melts in place. There could be, as we start to see some northeast and northerly flow developing, there could be a few chunks moving towards the Bering Strait, but otherwise no real significant change in the overall ice pack. Taking a look now at southeast Alaska for Thursday's marine winds and seas, expecting 3-foot seas and south wind at 15 knots for the Lynn Canal, and 20 to 25 knots out of the southeast, and 4 to 5 foot seas for the southern portions of the inner passageways. Out over the open waters, 20 to 25 out of the southwest and southeast, becoming easterly up towards Yakutat, and seas generally between 8 and 10 feet. And then on Friday, expecting southerly winds continuing for Lynn Canal, increasing during the afternoon to 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Towards the Clarence Pass or Stevens Passage, expecting northerly winds 10 knots and seas about 2 feet, and then southeast 25 knots, 5-foot seas down towards Ketchikan. Out over the open waters, northwest and southeast winds, northeast and southeast, 25 knots and 11 to 12 feet for the southern portions, and then southwest and northeast, 10 knots and about 8-foot seas up to the north. Taking a look at south central now, north winds out of the Prince William Sound at about 20 knots, seas 3 feet, becoming easterly and then north and northwesterly as it comes around that area of low pressure at about 25 to 30 knots, seas between 8 and 12 feet. And for the inner passageways here, we have anywhere between 15 and 30 knots, mainly out of the west-northwest, and seas 3 to 10 feet. Taking a look at Friday now, starting to see improving conditions. Variable winds 10 knots for much of the northern portions of the Gulf. Seas between about 2 and 6 feet there, 2 feet in Prince William Sound. Westerly flow will continue towards the Barren Islands at about 25 knots, seas 7 to 8 feet. And then west to southwest flow as you work your way towards Cook Inlet, decreasing from 25 down to 10 knots and seas going from 7 down to 2 feet. Out over the Alaska Peninsula, westerly flow will dominate 20 to 30 knots and seas between 8 and 11 feet. And then on Friday, west to southwest winds, 4 to 7 foot seas and about 10 to 20 knots. Out over the Aleutians, expecting west to southwest flow, 25 knots throughout the entire area and seas between 8 and 9 feet on Thursday. And for Friday, southwest to westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, starting to improve there as well, 6 to 7 foot seas. Out over the west coast, expect west to southwest flow, 10 to 20 knots and seas between 3 and 7 feet on Thursday. And then on Friday, a little bit better conditions there, improving 10 to 20 knots out of the southwest and eventually becoming southeast towards Gamble Island. And with that, seas will be on the order of 4 to 7 feet. Along the Arctic coast there, we see that northeast becoming easterly and eventually northwesterly flow down by the Seward Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots and seas fairly low at about 3 to 6 feet. And then northwest to northerly and then northeasterly flow, 10 to 20 knots, and again, seas between about 2 and 6 feet. So taking a recap of tonight's weather, expect this area of low pressure to be the main driver of weather for the next several days as it starts to turn in the Gulf of Alaska and dive to the southeast, continuing to bring rain for the south central Alaska and eventually building into southeast Alaska there on Thursday. We do expect another area of lower pressure over the interior to help trigger thunderstorms and showers along the mountains again on Thursday. Those could stretch as far south as Cook Inlet, so be advised for those planning to travel. And we do have our fog continuing along the Arctic coast as the area of high pressure sits north of the Beaufort Sea. And then on Friday, expect this area of low pressure to help continue to trigger showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Thunderstorms should be a little bit less widespread, and our area of low pressure slides southeast in the Gulf, helping to diminish the rain chances, while rain chances diminish as well for southwest Alaska. Thanks for watching the show.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.